Palmer,
Yes.
the world is still interested about the future of the summit. Can you give us the relation from State Department? To what extent is the United States interested in having a summit this year, or in what period?
We believe that in the nuclear era, in an era of nuclear weapons and nuclear danger, that there is no alternative to highest level discussions between the leaders of the Soviet Union and the United States. So we have an intense interest in going ahead with the commitment that Secretary General Gorbachev and President Reagan made to each other in November last year, a commitment to have a summit in Washington this year and a third summit in Moscow next year. We are intensely interested. We have a big agenda. We believe this is a time for serious discussions.
Well, and if there is a summit in this period you just mentioned, can you give us the list of the themes which should be on the agenda, and if you can put it in the rank of the priorities?
Well, first and foremost, as they both, Gorbachev and Reagan, agreed last November, the first priority is, of course, the avoidance of war between our two countries. But beyond that, we have a four-part agenda. It's difficult to say which part is more important than the others. They're all very important, but let me just say that very high on the list is an agreement to reduce strategic nuclear weapons, intercontinental range nuclear weapons, by 50%. That was agreed to in November and by the leaders, and that is the high priority for this next summit, to actually move from that principle of 50% reductions into a concrete agreement that would bring it about. We also want very much to achieve an intermediate range nuclear force agreement, which would, if we did everything we want, the United States wants, do away with all of these weapons, both in Europe and in Asia. Worldwide ban on these intermediate range nuclear weapons. There are many other objectives that we have in the arms control area. For example, we would like the Stockholm talks, in which Yugoslavia is, of course, a participant. We'd like an agreement in that set of talks, the Conference on Disarmament in Europe, like an agreement there this year, which would open up Europe, which would make Europe more transparent, which would enhance confidence in throughout Europe that there could not be a surprise attack. We have some objectives in the nuclear testing area. For example, we would like to enhance verification of nuclear tests so that treaties that we in the Soviet Union agreed on in 1974 could be ratified by our two political processes. That would be a good outcome this year. A second whole area of the agenda for us is regional issues. There are 5 or more wars actually underway today in the world, and we would like to contribute to solving those wars, not to exacerbating them. For example, in Afghanistan, where 1 out of every 4 Afghans has been driven out of the country, where the Soviet Union is conducting approximately 100 flights a day attacking the Afghan people, we would like to see an end to that war, and we would hope that a summit could contribute to a political solution there, to a political solution in Nicaragua, in Angola, in Cambodia, where the Vietnamese are occupying a country. We would like this regional dimension to be high on the agenda for the two leaders. Third, we would like very much to see some more progress in the human rights field. Freer travel between the Soviet Union and the West, more immigration permitted, more freedom of speech. We would like to see a normalization in the human rights field. And the fourth area, very great importance, is people-to-people contacts, trade. We'd like to see a very great expansion in exchanges among our young people. We'd also like to see an expansion in trade. And in a number of other ways, we think the bilateral relations, this whole fourth area, should serve as an important objective at the summit to reduce barriers between our two countries. So that's an ambitious agenda, a four-part agenda, but that's our agenda for the next summit.
Does it mean that the subject you have recently mentioned as a very important one, I'm thinking specifically on the problem of terrorism, which you raised also in Tokyo summit and put it very high on the agenda, that you are not going to specifically raise this question on the summit?
No, I'm glad you reminded me about terrorism. It is a very central preoccupation in the United States, in Europe. It has been, I know, for Yugoslavia, a central preoccupation for decades. We have indeed talked with the Soviet Union about terrorism. I personally have conducted a dialogue with their ambassador in charge here in Washington. We have seen recently some statements by Mr. Gorbachev which encourage us, which condemn terrorism. We would like to go beyond just statements, however, to some concrete actions, and in particular the governments which we believe are encouraging terrorism in the world, some of which are close to the Soviet Union. We would hope the Soviets would use their influence to discourage these governments from supporting terrorist actions in Europe and elsewhere.
Well, in discussing this question, are you abiding just to speak about the effects of this problem, or are you taking in account the approach, analytical approach to the problem of terrorism? I mean, to go to the roots of the problem, or just to study the outcome of the...
Well, I think we're doing both. We believe that terrorism, no matter what the excuse is for it, no matter what the ostensible rationale, that terrorism is wrong, that killing innocent men, women, and children, that attacking airports or attacking airplanes or ships or blowing up restaurants or any of these pure terrorist actions are wrong, no matter what the context is, no matter what the rationale, and that all civilized governments should oppose it. That said, we do, in fact, look at the political situations. We are working, for example, very hard in the Middle East. No government has a higher priority, I think, than the United States does in trying to bring about improvement in the political situation in the Middle East. Camp David, of course, brought a major improvement in the relationship between Arab and the Egyptians and the Israelis, which had been the central Arab-Israeli issue. We all remember the wars between Egypt and Israel. That problem is much better now, and that was in significant measure because of the diplomacy of this country. We have also more recently tried to contribute to a solution between Jordan and the Palestinians on the one side and Israel on the other side, and we would hope that governments like the government of Yugoslavia could contribute to that process.
And recently we had, in that process of looking for peace in the region of Middle East, there was a point which might hinder this process, or at least it gives some impression that it might change the whole situation. I precisely think on the rumors and some words that Israel might attack Syria on the recent. What if such things happen, and would it damage the whole prospect for a summit, for the whole prospect of solving the problem?
Well, I think we should listen to what the Israeli government has recently said on that subject. They said that they were not planning any attack on Syria and that there is no intention whatsoever of doing that. I think the only danger between Syria and Israel is if terrorist forces in Lebanon and in Syria are allowed to attack peaceful Israeli settlements. If you have that kind of pattern of activity, then Israel may react. But we have no information nor any impression that the Israelis simply want to attack Syria. There's no reason for that to happen.
There is one thing which, in my view, in the views of many people, raise some problems about the future problems which relates to a very important field, this field of nuclear energy in general. This is the accident in Chernobyl power station. Do you expect that this question might be raised in a future summit?
Yes, I think that it is a likely subject for our leaders. It is already a subject of discussion between our two governments. We have had several opportunities in the last few days to talk with the Soviet Union about Chernobyl, about our concerns for safety. The nuclear fallout wave has, of course, reached the United States, not only Yugoslavia, but it has come all the way to the United States. Fortunately, the level of radiation here is very low, but it makes all of us conscious that we live in an interdependent world and that what governments do domestically with regard to nuclear safety can and does affect the whole world. The Soviet Union, for example, is building a nuclear power plant in Cuba, just 90 miles from Florida. The safety of that plant is a legitimate concern of the United States. We have had to ban food imports from part of the area that received this radiation. We didn't like doing that, but that is another example of the kind of interdependence which President Reagan has talked with Mr. Gorbachev about and will in the future.
Do you think that it might, these talks might influence the whole field of discussion about nuclear energy, and both ways, not and that not only on peaceful use, but also for arms control and control of disarmament, armament, and as well as for the process of disarmament?
Yes, I think the Chernobyl accident does remind all of us of the great nuclear realities that we're living with, and of the necessity urgently to get on with the process of doing away with nuclear weapons. President Reagan in 1982 already proposed that all nuclear weapons be destroyed, and he has proposed a number of plans to do that. Frankly, we are a little disappointed that the Soviet Union has not moved ahead with us more rapidly to have meetings that would address these issues. We suggested to them in November in Geneva at the last summit that our foreign ministers get together in January already of this year. We now have had a 5-month delay by the Soviet Union, unwilling to have our leaders get together at the ministerial level to work on these issues, the nuclear issues. It is, in my view, very unfortunate that we've lost all of this time because the issues are there, the danger of war is there, and we really should get on with doing away with these weapons, but you can't do that unless you meet and talk.
The Chernobyl accident has raised very strong anti-nuclear feelings, I should say, all over the world. And do you suppose that it might influence some of the U.S. programs and some specific programs in which also the nuclear weapons are included in various variations? I'm thinking precisely on the Star Wars.
Well, of course, the whole purpose of what you call Star Wars of the Strategic Defense Program is to allow us to move into a non-nuclear world. The President believes this could provide an umbrella, a shield, so that nations, the Soviet Union and the United States and Europe, feeling protected by that shield, could in fact do away with these weapons altogether, and that we could move into a totally non-nuclear world. The shield, the Strategic Defense Program itself, would not involve nuclear weapons. It would not place any nuclear weapons in space. It would be the idea is to make nuclear weapons impotent, to make them useless, and therefore to allow us to move away from the kind of nuclear realities that we now live with.
Well, in evaluating the chances for discussion on the problems of armament and disarmament. Mr. Gorbachev has recently proposed some ideas, and I remember the time when Mr. Gromyko was called Mr. Niet. That means he was refusing some of or most of the proposals made by the West. And now it seems that Mr. Niet is coming on the other side, and because this was the answer to all of Mr. Gorbachev's refusal ideas and proposals. Well, I put this question as just to, if you can evaluate the essence of these proposals, and do you see some prospects in them?
Well, in fact, President Reagan has not at all been Mr. Niet. He's been Mr. Da. He's been saying yes to many things. The two of them agreed at the summit that they would try, whenever either side made a proposal, that they would try to find the good elements in it and build on those elements with their own counter-proposal. And we actually started with our own proposal in strategic weapons early in November, a proposal which I mentioned to do away with 50% of all the weapons, and to do that in a fairly quick time frame. We have still had no answer from the Soviet Union to that proposal of early November. When Mr. Gorbachev made his proposal in January on intermediate-range nuclear forces, we consulted carefully with the Europeans and with the Japanese and the Chinese, and we came back within 5 weeks with an answer which was certainly not yet. It was an answer saying we agree with elements of this proposal on INF, and this is how we would seek doing it, getting rid of the weapons entirely by 1989. So that was a very large Da answer. We were saying good, and our idea is to do away with all of them and do away with them quicker, not wait until the end of the century, do it by 1989. In the nuclear testing area, where Mr. Gorbachev has made some steps, we have said, let our testing experts get together without precondition. Let's get together right now and see what we can do together in the testing area. The Soviets have so far refused to have our testing experts meet, which is for us a very frustrating experience. I could go through all the areas of arms control and mention that in each one of them we have new proposals on the table which are very forthcoming and which could lead to concrete agreements. So we are in a very positive mode. The President wants agreements. He wants them soon. He will not be President forever, and he would like to see some early progress. And we are urging the Soviet Union to move from sweeping propaganda proposals to concrete, doable, near-term initiatives.
Mr. Palmer, well, in short, what do you think, what should be the steps which should be undertaken by the Soviets and by the U.S. in order to assure successful preparations for the summit?
Well, I think the most important single thing, having lived in a bureaucracy for 22 years, the most important single thing would be for the Soviet Union to schedule a date for the summit. President Reagan wanted to have the summit next month in June here in Washington, and if they had agreed 5 months ago to have it next month, we would by now have seen progress in all of these substantive areas. Soviet Union has chosen not to do that, preoccupied with its party congress and with internal matters, but we now still have an opportunity. We would like to go ahead and schedule a summit for later this year, November, December, and then, knowing that that is when it's going to be, to get our foreign ministers together next month. We'd be prepared to do it next month, and to start doing all the concrete substantive preparations in each of these various areas that I've mentioned, which would allow the two leaders, when they get together, to have major positive results. So I would say the single most important thing we could do is to get on with scheduling the high-level meetings.
Well, and this is my last question. Maybe it is a little bit informal, but did you ever thought about inviting some statesmen from some parts of the world just to join you on these talks in order to give another idea that it is not only a bilateral, not only a dialogue, but these things, the whole world is concerned about the results of this. So it's just in a symbolic way to see that in this dialogue the whole world is participating.
Well, I can understand the thought behind that, that the rest of the world certainly is deeply affected by what our two leaders do together, and in that sense the rest of the world has a vital interest. However, I must say that we have enough complications simply getting our two leaders together and trying to get them to come up with some good positive steps, and I'm concerned that if we added a third dimension, it might complicate matters. There are, however, other ways for Yugoslavia and the non-aligned countries and other countries to have a role here through the United Nations, through our bilateral relations, through a host of interactions. I think you are present at summit meetings. There is a keen awareness of your concerns on the part of the United States when we meet with the Soviet Union, of your concern for your sovereignty, your independence, for enhanced security, for doing away with nuclear weapons. Many of the things that I think if a Yugoslav or another leader was present that he would talk about are very much there.
Mr. Farman, thank you very much for having this interview with you, and really it was a great pleasure for me.
Hvala lepo I doviđenja.
Hvala lepo I vama još jedan put. Doviđenja.